A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, you might know it has become a regular update with a growing campaign around many council-run libraries around Australia that allow children's books that most of us will judge as completely unsuitable. Lots of libraries appear to have let down their defences and allowed books onto their shelves that are most often described as pornographic, available for the children to read. Well, family values advocate Bernard Gaynor is back with us. He's been highlighting the dangers of many of the books that are appearing on library shelves under the guise of children's reading. Bernard, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you very much, Neil, for having me on.
Bernard, when we talk about books on library shelves, some of us might be thinking, isn't there a classification board that can outlaw some of these sorts of books? When you identify one that's got pornographic material in it, surely somebody must be saying, no, you can't put that on the shelves where children will read. Is that not the case?
Well, look, Neil, in Australia we have a classification system which is led by the Australian Classification Board. It has a statutory responsibility to prevent children from accessing pornographic material, either in books or movies or computer games. And it is the front line of the defence against child pornography. And unfortunately, the Australian Classification Board has completely failed. It is a broken system. The Australian Classification Board is permitting highly pornographic comics and text-based novels to be classified as unrestricted, which means that children can borrow them, buy them, be given them by some stranger in the park. It is perfectly legal. So there's been a number of media stories about this year already, but the Classification Board needs to wake up to itself. It needs to start classifying these books appropriately according to Australian law. It is just unacceptable that pornographic books can be given to children.
As Christians, our ethics are really about protecting our children and raising them up in a godly way, helping them to be able to discern what's good and evil. But the Classification Board doesn't seem to be helping us at all, Bernie.
No, it doesn't, Neil. And I think most people will be very concerned that in its most recent submission to the proposed modernisation of classification laws, that the Classification Board has even recommended that references prohibiting 16 and 17-year-olds from appearing in pornographic movies be removed from the classification guidelines. This is completely unacceptable and contrary to what most Australians would consider to be appropriate. 16 and 17-year-olds should not be in pornographic movies, and the Classification Board, apparently the only book it hasn't read is the dictionary, because it believes that these pornographic depictions and descriptions in novels and comics are discreet. They're anything but discreet. They're highly explicit and graphic, and they would shock most people.
Well, let's talk about one of these volumes, not because we want to promote it, but that listeners might be aware. There's one called The Boys, and it's had some significant attention. There's even some mainstream articles too that have come out and said this is bad stuff, and in a hope that it might influence our legislators. But what's so bad about that particular book called The Boys?
Well, it's a 6-volume series, and half of the series, thankfully, has been restricted. It probably should be refused classification or banned under existing laws. The other half of the series is no better. In fact, some of these volumes depict in graphic detail rapes of women, and it is quite shocking, actually, the depictions. I have not met a single person yet who thinks that this content is suitable. We have a major problem, which is acknowledged by both sides of politics in our country in relation to violence against women, and it is widely acknowledged that access to pornography is one of the main drivers of violence against women and violence against children. And for the Classification Board to decide that rape pornography should be suitable for minors, which is what it has decided, is just, as I keep saying, unacceptable. This is not good enough. The Classification Board needs to start doing its job and complying with the laws that it's been given a duty to follow in order to protect Australians, and especially Australian children.
So you've got the Classification Board turning a blind eye to what most of us common sense thinking people will say that's pornography and that shouldn't be allowed for our kids. They've turned a blind eye. Then we need to trust people who are in libraries. And I guess when, you've got council libraries in your community, somehow or other you've got to keep a little bit of an eye on them because they may be letting things through that we might not think are appropriate for children to be able to read. Now, you've been working with a lot of local councils around Australia. Is there any particular council that you can identify here with us that's been maybe even refusing to look at the sort of content and they're stocking books on their shelves that are inappropriate?
Yes, I can, Neil. But first of all, I want to say, or just be a little bit careful, there are a number of librarians who are very concerned about this type of pornographic material and they do not want to see it on the shelf. So I just want to make sure that I'm not brushing all librarians with the same brush here, but the Australian Library Information Association, which is the peak body for librarians, has been completely captured by left-wing ideologues who think pornographic material is okay to show to children. So the Australian Library Information Association is not helping parents, and it is actually pushing to have some of these books on the shelves. Individual librarians, on the other hand, are a completely different category, and some of them are good. Obviously, some of them are not so good. But I can say that Rockhampton Council, so my campaign's been focused mainly in regional Queensland at this stage. Rockhampton Council is the last regional council in Queensland to have any of the 4 pornographic authors and their books on their shelves. It has refused to move a series called Preacher from its shelves, which is by a author called Garth Ennis. And this again is quite shocking. So I've actually had to put it, because Rockhampton Council and the Classification Board and the publisher are refusing to submit this book for assessment, I put a complaint into the E-Safety Commission about the e-book version of these books. And the E-Safety Commission has accepted that these books constitute pornographic material. They constitute Class 2 restricted material is the legal term. And they cannot be displayed on an Australian website to a person under the age of 18. These books are available for children to borrow in Rockhampton Council. They will be going. I'll be making sure of that. And Rockhampton Council can fight all they like for their pornographic stash of comics, but they have to go, and they will be going.
Okay, draws into focus the Rockhampton Council and their libraries there. And from what I understand, the name of the book is called The Preacher. And it's interesting, isn't it, that you've got this Christian dimension to the title of a book that, as I understand it, as you say, contains pornographic material, but also Nazi symbols at a time like this when people are very sensitive around the symbols that are being used and the attacks that have come against the Jewish community, that there could be such a book on a shelf and it's aimed at children. It's called The Preacher. Any thoughts from you on that?
Well, look, it's quite disgusting, actually. It essentially has Nazi pornography within it. And I believe that also breaches provisions of the Queensland Criminal Code, which now outlaw the public display of Nazi symbology. This book series is disgusting. And yes, you're quite right, Neil. There is a religious element to this series, although that is not the main reason that I am concerned about it. I'm concerned about the pornography displayed in it. But I think most people will be completely unsurprised to find that this series is completely anti-Christian as well. But as I say, I'm focused on ensuring that Australian laws are upheld, and Australian laws say that pornographic material should not be placed in the hands of children.
And as you said, you don't want to tar every librarian with a brush that paints them as evil, and certainly they're not. And no doubt even there's good counsellors on councils all around Australia who would be outraged that this sort of material might appear on their library shelves. How much onus is there on parents who take their children to a library to just keep a little bit of an eye on the sorts of things that their children have access to?
Yeah, it's a good question, Neil. And so parents have a very big responsibility here, and councils will actually try and use this to squirm out of the problem. They will say that parents ultimately are responsible for what their children access in the library, and in many ways that is true, although, as I say, Australian law should be upheld. But parents need to be aware of what their children are reading. Just because I'm targeting 4 specific authors for their pornographic content does not mean that there are many other disturbing books on library shelves that children probably do not benefit from reading at all. I'm talking about a whole bunch of Japanese-style manga comics. They might not be pornographic, but they certainly do not promote ideas that I think are good for children to grow up with. So parents do need to take some accountability here, absolutely. And I just want to say, so I have worked with a number of librarians on this. Also, there are a number of counsellors as well who are very concerned about this. So make sure you talk to your local librarians and your local counsellors and find out who's who in the zoo, because some of them are probably going to be on your side. And I say that in an encouraging way. You are not alone in this fight.
All right, so if the classification board is overtaken by ideologues and there are people who are in control of our local council libraries who are happy to wave this sort of thing through onto the bookshelves where children have access, then as parents who are concerned about the values of our children and the children of our neighbours, we might be concerned about that and need to speak up in an appropriate way. Is there an appropriate way that you speak up? If you're a parent and you find something like this on your local library bookshelf, and you might be in any of the states and territories around Australia, what sort of thing do you do? Do you just take it to the counter and make a complaint? How do you make a complaint about that, Bernie?
Sure, well, look, I would definitely take it to the counter and make a complaint. The librarians may not know what's in these books. I can't expect a librarian to have read every single book in a library. That's just not reasonable. So take it to them and you might find that they take action. If that doesn't work, I would go to the local counsellors and you've got to be specific. So you need to let them know exactly what book it is, on what pages you have a problem with, and why you have a problem with it. And if it's pornographic content, they have a legal obligation to do something about it. And if you want help with that, please contact me through my website. I'll be more than happy to talk to you. That's at bernardgaynor.com.au. I'll absolutely be more than happy to talk to you and help you through the complaint process.
And you might know Bernard Gaynor as the guy who was a decorated Australian Army veteran and has gone through all sorts of challenges over now more than a decade. He's also the host of an online program called The Bernie Gaynor Show, family values advocate. And yes, I'm sure Bernard is open to an extra new friend or two. Be a subscriber to the sorts of newsletters he sends out and perhaps give a few dollars by way of donation. bernardgaynor.com.au. Thanks so much for another update today on 2020.
Thank you very much, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.